next up, Councillor, for Councillor is Stuart Beeston.
Good morning. Nice to be here. Excuse me. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about housing to address that question. But first of all, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about myself. My education was in community planning and urban studies. My early career was as a planner in Toronto and Mississauga. I left the planning world and went into the restaurant business and was involved in the development of 2 restaurant concepts, Kelsey's being one and Turtle Jack's being the other. So I've been involved in planning, designing, building, operating restaurants in municipalities throughout southwestern Ontario. I've worked with developers, planners, architects, engineers, and a variety of different other consultants in that work. And I tell you that because in order to address the housing issue, it takes the collaborative effort of a number of people. It's not one person, it's not one council member, it's not even one council. Excuse me. There are things that can be done at the municipal level. There's discussions about what the county is doing and can do, but at a municipal level, there are a variety of tools at the disposal of the municipality in talking about increasing densities, mixed use opportunities which will allow to build in affordability, provide incentives in terms of expediting the process, reducing development fees, reducing taxes for those that meet the standards that are set for affordable housing. There are examples in other jurisdictions. In Montreal, the McGill School of Architecture developed a program, I think it's called My Home, where it specifically designed the buildings that were less expensive, smaller size, smaller properties that were more affordable, and even to the extent that people buying them had the option of completing some of the work themselves if they wanted to. There was a mention of additional dwelling units where you take existing buildings and you allow them, they're regulated, it has to be zoned and all that, but allow them to have the granny flats and the additional units in them. You also look at taking vacant properties and providing opportunities for public-private partnerships to develop them, which again allows for a reduced cost. You provide incentives to the developer through by mandating mixed densities. They're doing that in many municipalities, many jurisdictions. So there are things that the municipality can do, but it takes a collective will of the politicians, the public, and the professionals that the municipality engages to work with them.
Thank you. Do you have any questions?
We were talking about development, Larry Law and Cranberry Resort.
Yeah.
And how close those condos or housing has been built to the fairways. From me to you, that's how close they are to the T-blocks. So what will you do to prevent Larry Law from selling that course and turning into one big subdivision, which it is already turning into?
Well, I have a place in Cranberry Village, so I have an interest in that. So you're asking what could be done to prevent him from developing the golf course into?
Yes.
Well, I think that at the municipal, I also have a location in Oakville, and they're talking about developing the Glenmurray golf course into a golf course, into residential. And the town has enacted, taken some steps and measures in terms of bylaws and designations that are probably going to prevent that, or at least they're putting up a good fight. So there are ways that the municipality can address those concerns.
But will you support that, or will you support Larry Law?
Oh no, I would support keeping the golf course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, moving right along. Next up for Councillor is Steve Berman.
Hi everybody, my name's Steve Berman and thanks for having me here today. This is actually the first time I've ever spoken in front of a crowd without a script. It was at the suggestion of Marion McLeod, so if I pass out here, let her get up with the smelling salts for me. The question that I wanted to tackle was the last one, which is Collingwood has changed and how have you, because I ran 4 years ago and it's a different process this time. I became interested in politics a little over 6 years ago with the decision to build the two Sprung facilities. And I followed politics avidly after that, and I went to all the meetings, and I asked as many questions as I could, and I filed Freedom of Information Acts. I was really trying to get at why a decision that made no sense to me happened. When I ran 4 years ago, I knew that I wanted change amongst the current council, but I really didn't know much about municipal politics. I'd never been involved in it before. So after the last election, I applied to be a member of both the library board and the museum advisory committee, which I've done. So the museum advisory committee was a 2-year term, and I chaired my last year on it, and it was a great experience. Library board I'm still on with Councillor Ecclestone, and it's really taught me a lot more about how the municipality works from the inside, so that I can't just say I want something done and why doesn't it happen right away. It's taught me about the process, it's taught me about communicating with staff and really how things work. The other things that this council's done an awful lot of, the current council's done an awful lot of planning. So myself, my wife, and even with the waterfront, my daughter have taken part in the community-based strategic plan, and my wife was on, I believe it was called the Citizens Advisory Committee, which was a 9-person group in there. We took part in the economic action plan. Even my daughter went to the waterfront master plan sessions because she's always wanted a splash pad in town, and all of that has given me a better idea of how, not only what the people want, but how the process works. And I think over the last 6 years, probably along with Mr. Chadwick, we've probably used social media the most between the two of us, of sharing our views for what should be done in the town, how things have changed, our character on the issues, and so on and so forth. So I think this time I actually feel like I'm I've changed, that I would be a better candidate now, far more than I would have been 4 years ago, because I really understand what the issues are, and I understand how these things go through the town and what needs to be done with that.
If there are no questions, you're welcome to spend another minute.
I want this question.
You have a question?
No, I don't have anything else to
Okay,
add.
that's it. Okay. I think next up is Tina Comi.
My goodness. Thank you all for coming here. We're seated as far out as the lobby, and it reminds me of church at Easter, standing room only. I'm a first-time candidate, so I'm going to use a little bit of my time to tell you a little bit about myself. I have an honors degree in public administration from Carleton University. I've always been interested in how policy affects people. After graduation, I was recruited to the United States in something they called the brain drain of the late 1990s. And that's when we had two sectors emerging on us. We had the internet, and we had wireless communications, which is essentially your cell phone technology. So I went down there to help towns and municipalities come up with zoning plans and bylaws and ways of regulating the communication towers that are necessary for that wireless communication. During my time down there, I grew in my skills, and I became something called a wireless implementation engineer. I became a construction manager, a project manager, a program manager, and eventually I was the president of a design, engineering, and construction firm. That type of job requires a lot of travel, and when it came time to choose a place to live, I was delighted to choose Collingwood for my family. I have 2 young children, ages 8 and 11. They attend St. Mary's School. For the past 2 years, I've served on our grant advisory committee, as well as working with some of our Syrian newcomers. The question I chose to answer today is related to the harbor and the waterfront. And the reason I chose that one, there are some people in town with a Comi for Council sign on their car. One of them is Mr. Bing Jowett, and I think he would be very upset to hear that I had an opportunity to talk about the harbor and turn it down. In fact, here at Ruperts Landing, I believe it's maybe, 3-4 years ago, you put in some marine facilities. So we did some work on your harbor, and I bet that that's been very well received. We know that our waterfront is one of our most important natural resources and provides tremendous opportunity for tourism. So I would say I'd be an advocate for marine tourism. We know that those people that come into town like to spend money. In fact, I had an opportunity to go on a very beautiful boat, and they said just in the past 3 days that they've been in town, they had to talk loudly because they had their generator running because we don't have facilities yet. They said they spent $600, right? They dined at our restaurants, they spent money at our local shops. Something else, of course, is our waterfront master plan. It's a beautiful plan. It's incredibly important. But you know, a plan is only as good as its implementation. So if you're concerned about your waterfront, you should look for councillors that are committed to putting that plan into action. I don't think I've knocked on any parent's door that haven't been obsessed and concerned about a splash pad. So that is a top priority. I'm also an advocate for our terminal buildings. We know that there's some pressure right now in terms of what we're going to do. We're out of time. All right, well, thank you for your time.
Any questions?
Please continue about the terminal.
There you go. You have your minute.
Thank you so much. Okay, I only got a minute. The terminal buildings, they are an important historical icon, and our historical buildings are under immense pressure when we talk about our growth. Now, something unique to my background are those antennas at the top of the terminal. We have a lot of wireless carriers broadcasting, and based on my experience, I actually authored a white paper helping towns and municipalities maximize their revenue. It will not be the only answer to the terminals, but I guarantee you that the broadcasters up there will participate in the restoration, and I can tell you I'm an advocate for working towards finding a solution. I think it's important we always talk about the cost as the delta between the two. It's not a $0 decision to tear them down, and we know that environmental remediation can be very costly. So really, when we take that up to 10 million and we take that up to 6 million, we could be just simply talking, not simply, but about a $4 million decision. So it's important we frame it correctly. Thank you.